In just 63 seconds of chilling silence, Donald Trump's empire of lies collapsed before 330 million Americans watching live. Jasmine Crockett unleashed the fury of skyrocketing grocery bills, up 40% to 20,000 stalled jobs and 30 for crushing lawsuits tied to corruption and the Epstein scandal. The chamber shook, the nation gasped, and Trump froze as if history itself had cornered him. What did Jasmine say that brought the most powerful man in America to his knees? Stay with us. The Capitol dome gleamed against a gray sky, but inside the chamber the air was thick, charged, as though every light, every lens, every human breath was waiting to combust. The broadcast cut live in high definition, a single sweeping shot of the hearing room, flags draped heavy behind the dais, rows of reporters perched like hawks above their laptops. At the center sat Jasmine Crockett, her jaw set with a fighter's calm, her hand posed on a folder of evidence that seemed to hum with urgency. Across from her, Donald Trump leaned back, arms folded, a practiced scowl frozen into place, daring the nation to blink first. The chyron across the screen screamed. Trump's triple crisis, Jobs, Epstein, legal losses. The tension wasn't stagecraft. It was lived. Families across America, parents rationing groceries, workers staring at pink slips, survivors of Epstein's predation were glued to their screens. This wasn't just politics, it was their reality put on trial. The sound of cameras snapping cracked like gunfire. The gavel fell once, echoing like a starting pistol, and in that instant, the chamber became an arena. Jasmine didn't waste a syllable. She leaned forward into the microphone, eyes drilling through the glass lens that carried her voice into millions of homes. Today is not a show, it's not spin, it's not partisan warfare. Today is about betrayal of the American people. Her voice didn't rise, it cut, each word honed to pierce. The murmurs in the gallery stiffened into silence, even the rustling of Trump's lawyers, and still, as if they knew the storm had broken, Trump shifted, lips twitching toward his trademark sneer, but Jasmine was already unfolding the truth. 20,000 jobs, that's all America got last quarter. 20,000 when economists predicted more than 3 times that. Meanwhile, groceries up 40%, parents choosing between milk and medicine. She lifted a receipt, held it high under the lights. The camera zoomed in. $132.78 for basics that once cost $70. The image was devastating in its simplicity. Mr. Trump, she continued, you promise prosperity. You promise strength. Instead, Americans got pink slips, empty pantries, and a bill they can't pay. Her voice broke not with weakness, but with fury, raw and human. A ripple passed through the room. The audience at home could feel it, the pulse of a mother, a daughter, a fighter who carried other people's burdens like armor. Trump barked out, fake news, that the words fell flat, lost under the weight of her silence after. She didn't answer him, she stared at him, letting the camera drink in his flushed face, his restless fingers, the sweat starting to creep under his collar. In that quiet, the imbalance was exposed. One woman armed with facts and fire against the hollow thunder of a man who once commanded the world stage. The narrator's voice slid over the scene. A triple crisis is not theory, it is lived pain. Jobs stalled. Justice delayed. Laws defied. And now, under these lights, the reckoning begins. Jasmine turned back to the camera, eyes locking with the nation itself. If you had one chance, right now, to ask Donald Trump a question on live television, what would you ask? The challenge didn't just hang in the air. Trump slammed his palm against the table, his voice ricocheting through the chamber like a crack of thunder. This is nothing but a witch hunt, he barked, leaning forward, his face blotched with defiance, his words meant to ignite his allies. In the gallery, cameras zoomed in tight on his scowl, the live feed catching every bead of sweat rolling down his temple. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She rose slightly from her seat, her posture a blade, her silence more dangerous than any shout. When she spoke, her tone was low but sharp, each syllable carrying the weight of a hammer. 20,000 jobs, that's all your so-called miracle economy delivered, not 200,000. Not the recovery you promised. 20,000. She held up a chart, giant red lines plunging downward across the screen behind her. Gasps rippled through the room. The graphic zoomed in. Projections of 75,000 jobs turned to dust, the reality humiliating in its smallness. Then she delivered the blow that pierced beyond policy and into the daily lives of millions. Jasmine held up another board. The average American grocery bill, once manageable, now ballooned to nearly double. Under the lights, a crumpled receipt was projected on the screen, a cruel artifact of everyday struggle. Milk, bread, eggs 40% higher, she declared. For families already drowning, your policies didn't throw a life raft. They tied an anchor. The image burned on the screen as the gallery whispered, mothers clutching their purses tighter, fathers shifting in their seats with a grim nod. Trump lurched forward, his voice sharp and desperate. Lies, fake numbers, these are doctored charts, made-up statistics. He pointed across the chamber, his finger trembling with rage, his voice straining to drown out the truth. But the harder he pressed, the more hollow he sounded. The camera cut to his clenched fists, his jaw grinding against words he could not defend. His denials rang in the air like empty tin, clattering against the hard silence that followed Jasmine's facts. Jasmine waited, eyes locked on him, unblinking. Then she leaned in closer, her voice cutting through the nose like glass against steel. If these numbers are fake, why are Americans living them? Why are their jobs disappearing, their cupboards bare, their paychecks stretched past breaking? These numbers don't come from me, they come from the receipts in every... The chamber cracked open like a fault line. Marjorie Taylor Greene shot up from her seat, voice shrill, cutting through the tension like a jagged blade. This is a sham. You're attacking a former president with cooked-up garbage. Her fist slammed against the desk, the sound ricocheting off marble walls. Before the echo faded, Jim Jordan lunged into the fray, pointing a finger at Jasmine, his voice pitched into fury. You're grandstanding. This is nothing but a stage circus for the cameras. The Republican wall rose loud and hostile, a wave meant to drown one woman's voice, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She stayed rooted, her shoulders squared, her gaze unbroken. She lifted to gavel, struck once, and the sound was thunder-hard, resonant, commanding silence. Order, she said, her tone cold steel. If you came here to shout, sit down. If you came here for truth, listen. Her words didn't rise in volume. They cut through chaos by the sheer force of conviction. Greene froze mid-yell, Jordan's jaw snapped shut, and the chamber fell still, as though the air itself bent to her authority. It was more than composure, it was defiance, the refusal to be bullied into silence. Cameras zoomed in on her face, the steel glint in her eyes carried across the nation. Millions of viewers at home saw not just a congresswoman, they saw a fighter, holding the line against a mob. The narration pressed in, stark and heavy. In this chamber, she faced a wall of no's. Outside these walls, Americans faced their own walls. Layoffs at the factory gate, grocery bills doubling overnight, rent climbing higher than paychecks can reach. The struggle is the same, chaos pressing down, voices trying to drown you out, and the desperate need for someone, anyone, to hold the floor. As Jasmine stood firm, families at home saw themselves in her stance. She wasn't just resisting Republicans, she was resisting the daily indignities crushing the working class. Trump leaned forward now, finally breaking his stillness. He smirked, lips curling with a predator's arrogance, his voice pitched low so that every microphone caught it, every speaker carried it. You think you've got me cornered? He sneered, his eyes narrowing into shards of ice. A hush swept the chamber, anticipation thick as smoke. He leaned closer, the smirk widening, each syllable dripping menace. Just wait. The words weren't a threat, they were a promise, a dark omen rolling like thunder before the storm. The gallery shifted uneasily, reporters' fingers paused above their keyboards, and the broadcast lingered on Trump's grin. Across America, millions felt the chill of it, as though history itself had just whispered that the fight was far from over, that the clash to come would be fiercer, bloodier, more relentless. And in that suspended moment, the nation asked itself, if Jasmine Crockett could silence the mob, could she also silence the man who thrived in chaos? The silence after Trump's smirk was shattered when Jasmine snapped open a thick binder, the slap of paper against it echoing like a gunshot. She slid the first document beneath the camera lights, and instantly the broadcast filled with the Bureau of Labor Statistics seal. These are not my numbers, she declared, her voice firm, steady. They are the government's own. And they show what Mr. Trump tried to bury. On the screen, a chart exploded into color, job growth collapsing like a falling skyscraper. Rate arrows slashed downward, projections obliterated, reality exposed. Trump stiffened, jaw clenching. "Fake. This is fake," he shouted. But Trump lurched forward, stabbing a finger across the room. "These professors are clowns." His voice cracked through the microphone, rattling the speakers, drawing startled looks from the press rows. The words hung heavy, venomous, meant to humiliate. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned into her mic, her eyes burning with a clarity that cut through the haze of anger. "Clowns don't run your grocery bills, Mr. Trump. Your tariffs do." Her retort hit like a whip, the chamber recoiling as murmurs rippled through the crowd. For a heartbeat, even the cameras seemed to tremble with the weight of the exchange. On the broadcast feed, the control room rolled a sudden montage of flashback reel of Trump's greatest manipulations. The infamous Sharpiegate image, the black marker circle cruelly drawn over a hurricane path. A press conference where a chart was held upside down. Tweets declaring record job growth overlaid with plunging graphs. Each image slammed across the screen like a prosecutor's exhibit, the narrative spelling out a pattern. Bend reality, deny truth, then demand loyalty. The gallery shifted uneasily as Trump's face reddened. He slammed his palm on the table, the crack like a pistol shot, and the microphone squealed with piercing feedback. Reporters winced, covering their ears, the sound amplifying his desperation rather than his authority. He tried to speak over it, barking, "Fake. Lies, always lies." But the screech drowned him out, leaving only the image of a man unraveling under pressure. Jasmine sat perfectly still, letting the chaos swirl around her like a storm breaking on stone. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy, letting the spectacle speak for itself. She finally raised her voice, slow, deliberate, the calm in the hurricane. "America doesn't live in charts you can redraw with a marker. It lives in paychecks that vanish too soon, in receipts that scream louder than campaign slogans, in families counting pennies where promises unstood." The words landed heavy, and across the nation living rooms went silent. Viewers weren't just watching, they were remembering. Trump's fist hovered above the desk, trembling, his jaw grinding as though words were being chewed up before they could leave his mouth. The suspense thickened, unbearable, the audience at home frozen in anticipation of the inevitable meltdown. Every camera was locked on his face, every reporter's finger posed over their keyboard, waiting for the explosion that everyone knew was coming. And Jasmine, eyes locked on him, leaned just close enough for her voice to strike like a blade. "You can scream fake 1,000 times. You can smear professors, fire economists, redraw hurricanes. But what happens, Mr. Trump, what happens when the data speaks louder than denial?" The lights dimmed and the screens behind Jasmine flickered to life. Suddenly, America was no longer watching politicians spar, they were staring into the faces of their neighbors. First came a steelworker in Ohio, hard hat hanging on the wall behind him, his voice breaking as he explained how his plant shut down after tariffs gutted exports. 20 years on the line, he said, eyes glistening. And one morning, it was gone, no severance, no warning. Just locked gates. His words hung in the chamber like lead, and the silence that followed was louder than any gavel. Then a new face filled the screen, a farmer from New Mexico, sun-scorched and weary, his voice thick with grit. He held up a weathered notebook, the numbers scrawled inside brutal in their honesty. "Silver's up 40%, feeds through the roof, we can't survive another season like this." He swallowed hard, his wife's hand gripping his shoulder just inside the frame, the silent testimony of two people watching a family dream rot from the inside out. A third video rolled. A Latina shop owner in Chicago standing in front of empty shelves. "I laid off 3 workers last month," she said, her voice trembling between anger and despair. "They were like family, I couldn't keep them. My community's bleeding. And nobody's listening." Her eyes blazed, her pain stilling out of the screen and into living rooms across the country. Jasmine rose from her chair and let the weight of those voices linger. She didn't shout, didn't grandstand. She spoke like someone carrying their stories on her shoulders. "These are not statistics," she said, her voice resonant, every word a nail in the coffin of denial. "These are working people, Black families in Detroit choosing between groceries and rent. Latino workers in Texas crushed under disappearing jobs. Farmers in the Midwest watching generations of labor collapse. These are the faces of Mr. Trump's economy." She gestured toward the screens, her hand trembling not from weakness, but from fury contained. The chamber pulsed with emotion. Reporters scribbled in silence, cameras zoomed in tight on the screens, and for a fleeting moment, America felt its own reflection staring back. It wasn't red or blue, left or right, it was human pain, raw and undeniable. Jasmine let the empathy crest, her voice softening into something more intimate. When the numbers rise against you, you feel it at your kitchen table. When policies fail, they fail in the eyes of your children asking why there's no dinner. That is the truth behind every chart, every receipt, every broken promise. And then, like a blade slicing through the fragile quiet, Trump lurched forward, face red, jaw tight, his voice cracked, dripping with contempt. "Crybabies don't run America, I do." The words slammed into the chamber like a thunderclap, the cruelty naked, the arrogance unmasked. The gallery gasped, the nation stiffened, and Jasmine's eyes narrowed, the storm gathering for the next blow. Jasmine's hand lowered the folder of job reports, and for a moment the chamber believed the storm was easing. Then she lifted her eyes, and her voice dropped into something darker, something that seemed to chill the marble itself. "Jobs are lives," she said slowly, her words cutting with surgical precision. "But justice is souls." The word struck harder than any statistic. It wasn't policy anymore, it was morality. And the shift in the room was palpable. The screens behind her flared again, but this time it wasn't charts or receipts. A face appeared, blurred to protect identity, voice trembling through distortion. The young woman's words cracked with pain. "I was 16. He told me I'd be safe, but every door I opened was another cage." Gasps rippled across the gallery. Reporters froze mid-keystroke, the scratching of pens replaced by the pounding of silence. Every camera zoomed closer, the image bleeding into living rooms across America. Her testimony rolled on, halting, raw, unvarnished. "We went to the authorities, we begged for protection. But people with power, people close to Mr. Trump, made sure our voices never reached daylight. We were invisible, by design." The distortion couldn't hide the sob breaking through her throat. A man in the gallery put his face in his hands. Viewers at home clutched the arms of their chairs. It wasn't politics anymore, it was horror, delivered in first person. Trump shifted in his seat, lips pressed into a thin line. For once, he didn't interrupt, his silence was louder than any denial. Jasmine let the video end, then stood perfectly still, letting the ache breathe in the chamber. The air thickened, charged with the collective realization that this wasn't just about numbers, not just about bills or jobs, it was about lives broken, trust shattered, soul scarred. When she finally spoke again, Jasmine's voice trembled not from fear, but from fury barely held. "This is not spin. This is not partisan theater. This is a child's life. This is a victim's soul. And while you argued over charts and shouted about witch hunts, real people begged for justice and were met with silence." Her words carried beyond the cameras, slicing into every home, every conscience. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Green, even Jordan, sat motionless, eyes darting anywhere but the screen. It was the kind of silence that exposes guilt without a single verdict, the kind that forces the nation to sit with its shame. For a full 30 seconds, nothing moved but the steady red blink of recording lights. Jasmine leaned forward, her gaze piercing the lens, speaking not to Trump, but to the people. The files remain sealed, the names remain hidden, and the victims remain unheard. So I ask you, America, watching right now, should every Epstein file be made public? Yes or no? The words thundered across the silence, a dare, a demand, a judgment. The cliffhanger wasn't in what she revealed, it was in what the country would choose to answer. Trump erupted from his chair, the desk rattling under his fists, his voice ripping through the chamber like a siren. "Don't drag me into this filth," he roared, his face flushed crimson, his chest heaving as if the weight of exposure had knocked the air from his lungs. The gallery gasped, the sound ricocheting into living rooms nationwide. Jasmine didn't move. She tilted her head just slightly, the way a predator studies prey, and answered with the kind of cold precision that could slice marble. "The filth," she said, her voice ringing steady and merciless, "is already under your name in the failures of your DOJ. Victims begged for protection, they got secrecy instead. That's your legacy, Mr. Trump." The chamber quaked. Green leapt up, shrieking over the silence, "This is outrageous. She's lying. She's weaponizing victims for political gain." Her voice was jagged glass, meant to distract, to fracture the moment. But Jasmine didn't allow the derailment. She snapped her gavel down, the strike like a cannon blast, then leveled her gaze. "Sit down, Marjorie. This is about victims, not your theatrics." The chamber went still again, the command to absolute. Viewers at home saw the power shift, one woman silencing not only Trump's denials, but also the shrill defenses of his enablers. Trump leaned forward, sweat sliding down his cheek, eyes narrowed into slits. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat, his voice lower now, but dripping with venom. Jasmine didn't blink. "I know what every victim knows, that when they sought justice, your administration chose silence. And silence is complicity." The weight of her words pressed down, heavier than any statistic or report. It was no longer politics, it was accusation carved in stone. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face, catching the twitch of his jaw, the restless shift of his hands, the telltale signs of a man cornered by truth. The audience watching could feel the fury rising in their own chests, the outrage of seeing the most powerful man in the country try to swat away voices already broken by trauma. Fury was no longer just Jasmine's, it belonged to everyone watching. And then, in the back of the chamber, a figure rose. A lawyer, sharp-suited and unsmiling, lifted a thick envelope stamped with the Department of Justice seal. The gallery leaned forward, breath caught in collective suspense. He raised the packet, high, his voice like a bell tolling across the room. "The truth is in here," gasps tore through the air. Reporters scrambled, cameras zoomed, America's pulse quickened. Jasmine turned her gaze toward the envelope, the entire chamber magnetized by its presence. And just as the broadcast cut to a close-up of that seal glinting under the lights, the nation asked itself the question it feared most: what names, what secrets, what power would be shattered if those files were opened? Jasmine leaned forward, her words honed into a blade. "Were you protecting Epstein's secrets, Mr. Trump, or were you protecting your own allies?" The question detonated in the chamber. The gallery stiffened, reporters froze, and the air turned electric. Every microphone caught the cadence of her challenge, every lens fixed on the man at the center of it all. Trump didn't bark this time. He didn't pound the table, he smirked, a slow, unsettling curl of the lips that seemed rehearsed yet hollow. Like a mask painted over panic, he reclined slightly in his chair, folding his arms as though to signal contempt, but his eyes betrayed him, darting side to side, looking for rescue in a room where none was coming. Seconds ticked by. He said nothing. Cameras tightened their focus, the world watching every twitch of his jaw, every bead of sweat forming at his temple. On social media, timelines ignited like wildfire. Hashtags surged instantly. Hashtag Trump frozen. Hashtag Epstein truth. Hashtag for 7 seconds. In living rooms across the country, viewers leaned forward, whispers breaking out in kitchens and bars and offices. Why isn't he answering? The silence grew unbearable. 20 seconds, 30. The chamber didn't dare breathe, as though the walls themselves demanded a reply. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. She let the void expand, let the weight of the unsaid crush down on him. Her restraint became its own weapon, and Trump's refusal became louder than any denial. At 40 seconds, the gallery shifted, then easily. Green tugged at her papers. Jordan glanced around nervously. Aides whispered frantically into phones. Still Trump said nothing. His smirk began to tremble, the edges of his mouth faltering, as though the mask was cracking under the sheer gravity of exposure. The silence wasn't his shield anymore, it was his indictment. 40-7 seconds. The nation counted with the clock, each beat hammering into collective memory. A former president, accused not by slogans, but by silence, his refusal, etched into history, as damning as any confession. The cameras held his face in merciless close-up, every twitch magnified, every second immortalized. Jasmine finally broke the stillness, her voice low, resonant, deliberate. "You see, America, sometimes the loudest answers come from silence. And this silence is screaming at us all." Her words hit like a verdict. The gallery erupted, gasps, shouts, the shuffle of disbelief. On social media, clips of Trump's frozen stare went viral in real time. Millions replaying the moment that felt like truth stripped bare. She turned back to the camera, her gaze piercing through the lens into the living rooms of the nation. "So now the choice is not his," she declared, her tone rising into steel. "It's yours. What will America choose, silence or justice?" The words rang out like a bell toll, a challenge, a summons, and as the feed cut to Trump's unblinking face one last time, The entire country was left trembling in the void between cowardice and truth. Jasmine didn't give the room time to recover from the silence of Epstein's shadow. She struck again, this time with cold precision, flipping open a new binder thick with indictments and rulings. Her voice cut through the chamber like a scalpel. "Mr. Trump, let's talk about your record, not your promises, not your slogans, but your legal baggage. 34 felony convictions, 62 active lawsuits. Tariffs overturned in court after judges appointed by both parties ruled them unlawful. That is not leadership, that is liability." The words echoed, each number dropping like a gavel strike, each statistic a nail hammered into the coffin of denial. Trump jerked forward, his face blotched with fury, his voice rising into a cracked roar. "They're all witch hunts." The phrase tore from him like a reflex, desperate and overused, the old shield he had wielded for years. His allies nodded frantically, their muttering like static against the silence that followed, but Jasmine was already poised to strike. She leaned into her microphone, her lips curling into something almost like a smile. "Funny," she said, the chamber leaning in to catch every syllable. "Witches don't usually have 34 felonies." The room gasped, half in shock, half in bitter laughter. The gallery rippled with sound, uneasy laughter rolling through the crowd, reporters chuckling darkly under their breath, even some members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Across the country, living rooms erupted with a different kind of humor, the laughter of people who recognized the absurdity of corruption dressed as victimhood. It wasn't joy, it was catharsis, a release of years of pent-up frustration. The camera zoomed on Trump's face as he scowled, the corners of his mouth twitching downward, his eyes blazing with rage. Jasmine didn't stop there. She lifted a single sheet of paper, waving it once for the cameras. "This one. A ruling just last month overturning your tariff games. The court said you exceeded your power, abused the law, and cost American farmers their livelihoods. These aren't my words, they're a judge's. These 62 lawsuits, they're not fairy tales. They're the weight of a system trying to hold you accountable. 34 felonies. That's not persecution, that's a pattern." She dropped the paper onto the desk, the thud resonating like a verdict. Trump tried to shout over her, his voice breaking into the microphone, but the screech of feedback silenced him again, his rage collapsing into a mess of static and fury. Jasmine didn't look at him, she looked into the camera, into the eyes of millions. "America, you've heard the excuses, you've heard the cries of witch hunt. But you've also seen the numbers 34, 62, overturned again and again. So tell me." She paused, letting the tension cold tighter, her tone sharp as a blade. "Doesn't the number say it all? Comment 34 if you think the time for excuses is over." The words hit like a challenge hurled across the country, a dare for the people themselves to weigh the evidence, to make their voices part of the record. And as the feet held on Trump's clenched jaw and Jasmine's unflinching stare, the question reverberated like a drumbeat. "How many?" The chamber murmured, the weight of her words heavy in the air. Jasmine leaned forward, her face carved in steel, and delivered the dagger. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice steady but edged with fire, "whose table did you take food from? Which child did you decide would eat less so your tariffs and tax breaks could survive?" The question detonated in the room. Gasps rippled through the gallery like shockwaves. Even the stenographer paused, hands frozen above the keys, as if unsure how to capture the moment. The camera cut to Trump, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing into slits. For the first time, the former president looked less like the master of chaos and more like a man trapped beneath the weight of his own choices. He gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening, but Jasmine pressed on, her voice gaining strength with every syllable. Was it the mother in Detroit, working 2 jobs and still finding her fridge empty? Was it the veteran in Ohio who served this country, only to be told there's no assistance left for his family? Or was it the farm worker in Texas, the backbone of the economy, left to explain to his children why dinner is just bread and water? The audience at home could see it, the stark imagery, the faces of the invisible, suddenly made visible. Families watching from their couches felt the knife twist, because the stories weren't hypothetical. They were theirs, groceries steriles too expensive, benefits slashed, meals cut in half, and here, in front of the entire nation, Jasmine forced Trump to confront it. The gallery was on edge now, the tension almost unbearable. A mother in the front row clutched her purse tighter, tears streaking her cheeks as she whispered something to her child. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances, fingers racing across keyboards to capture every charged word. This was no longer testimony, it was an indictment written in hunger, an accusation carved into the soul of the country. Trump's lips curled back, and he finally broke the silence with a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the microphones. "Don't push. M.E. Crockett." His words dripped with menace, part threat, part warning, part confession of how deeply she had cut. The chamber froze, the nation gripped, and the feed lingered on his face, red, trembling, cornered before snapping back to Jasmine, her eyes burning like fire. And in that suspended second, the question wasn't whether she had pushed him too far, but whether he had just revealed how far the truth would push him. Trump's composure snapped like brittle glass. He slammed his palm against the desk, leaned into the microphone, and spat the words like poison. "You're nothing but a puppet, Crockett, a puppet dancing for the cameras." His voice boomed, raw with rage, the insult slicing through the chamber like shrapnel. The gallery gasped, the sound echoing across marble and microphones, feeding into millions of living rooms. The insult wasn't just aimed at Jasmine, it was meant to belittle every voice she carried with her. But Jasmine didn't recoil. She straightened, the fire in her eyes igniting into something unbreakable, and delivered her strike with lethal calm. "Dead or a puppet of truth," she said, her tone like steel scraping against stone. Then a master of lies, her words detonated. The chamber convulsed with nose cheers, gasps, jeers, the sudden surge of clashing voices. Reporters scrambled to capture it, cameras zoomed tight on her unflinching face, and for one breathless moment it seemed as if the walls themselves were vibrating with the collision of defiance and fury. Security shifted immediately. Men in dark suits edged closer to the dais, their eyes darting, their hands at their earpieces. The tension wasn't just audible, it was physical, like static before a lightning strike. Trump leaned forward, his face blotched crimson, teeth bared in something between a snarl and a smirk. He pointed a trembling finger across the table at Jasmine, his whole body quivering with the effort to contain himself. The nation watched, transfixed, as the image of raw power losing control broadcast unfiltered into homes and phones and headlines. The narration rose above the chaos, heavy with gravity. When truth confronts power, the chamber becomes a battlefield. And when the lie is cornered, it lashes out with fury, because the one thing it cannot survive is exposure. The feed cut between close-ups, Jasmine, steady and immovable, her face lit by conviction. Trump, seething, sweat beading on his brow, his voice strangled by his own rage. The eruption in the gallery mirrored the eruption across America. Social feeds blazed with clips of the exchange hashtags igniting in real time. Hashtag puppet of truth, hashtag master of lies, hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. The insult meant to diminish her had already been claimed as a banner, weaponized by the people watching, the crowd inside. The chamber rose to their feet, voices crashing over one another in a storm of outrage and defiance. It no longer felt like a hearing, it felt like the brink of riot. Jasmine didn't flinch. She held his glare, unyielding, a living embodiment of resistance. The cameras drank in the contrast, one side unraveling, the other forged harder by fire. The air was suffocating, suspense dragging seconds into eternities. Trump's lips twitched as if he would erupt again, his chair creaking beneath the pressure of his rage. And then came the moment, suspended like a blade above the nation. Would he storm out in humiliation, or would he detonate in fury right there? Under the lights, the cliffhanger cut into every home, the question unspoken yet deafening. Will Donald Trump walk away, or will he explode and take the chamber with him? Jasmine's voice sliced through the pandemonium like a blade. She leaned into the microphone, every syllable sharp enough to draw blood. Answer to the people, right now. The demand didn't echo, it detonated. The chamber snapped into silence, reporters froze mid-keystroke, and the nation watching from their living rooms leaned in so close it felt like their screens might shatter. Trump's body stiffened. His hands, once pounding the desk in rage, gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles bleached white. His jaw clenched, the muscles twitching beneath his skin, his lips pressed shut as if locked from within. The camera zoomed tight, filling the screen with his face, a face once so quick to taunt, so loud in bluster, now a mask of paralysis. Viewers could see the sweat glistening on his brow, the twitch of his eye, the slight tremor in his chin. The clock began to tick. 1 second, 5, 10, the sound of it was deafening, louder than any argument that had come before. The silence pressed down on the chamber like a weight no one dared disturb. At 15 seconds, the first murmur broke out in the gallery, restless whispers, the rustling of papers, a cough that sounded like thunder in the void. At 25 seconds, the roar that shattered 63 seconds of silence didn't end, it detonated into chaos. Trump surged forward, his fists hammering the desk, his voice a torrent of rage that cracked through the chamber. "This is a circus. You're all liars." The words boomed through the microphones, spitting venom across marble walls, his face a storm of sweat and fury. He tried to go further, his mouth unleashing curses so vile the broadcast blurred into heavy bleeps, the sound of censorship, blaring louder than the words themselves. For the first time, millions of viewers weren't hearing him, they were hearing the raw violence of a man censored by decency itself. The gallery erupted in shock. Some gasped, others jeered. Reporters stood from their chairs, pens frozen, cameras shaking as they zoomed in tight on the crimson flush burning across his skin. MTG leapt from her seat, lunging toward him like a shield, waving her hands at the cameras, screaming, "He's being attacked. He's being silenced." But her shrill defense was drowned by the tidal wave of boos cascading from the crowd. The sound rose, layer upon layer, until it felt like the walls themselves trembled under the pressure of collective outrage. Trump slammed the mic so hard the screech rattled every ear in the room. His words, when they cut through the static, came jagged and desperate. "You're fake, you're frauds, you're enemies of the people." He jabbed a finger wildly at Jasmine, at the press, at anyone within reach, his fury spinning into chaos. The camera feed split, one angle catching his crimson face twisted in fury, another panning to Jasmine, calm, unshaken, her silence more powerful than his rage. The juxtaposition was devastating, one image of collapse, the other of composure. The live stream chat went nuclear. Comments flooded faster than the screen could process, unhinged. "This is insanity. Have you ever seen a president lose it on live TV like this?" Hashtags surged across platforms. Hashtag Trump Meltdown. Hashtag Circus in Congress. Hashtag Crockett unmoved. The meltdown wasn't just a moment, it was a spectacle, replayed, clipped, shared in real time by millions stunned into disbelief. The chamber had lost all pretense of order. Security shifted closer, hands near their earpieces, eyes locked on the former president's trembling fists. MTG screamed herself hoarse. Jordan waved his arms like a drowning man. But the tide had already turned. The crowd wasn't with them. The crowd was watching Trump implode, live, unfiltered, his empire of bravado collapsing under the weight of his own fury. And Jasmine. She stayed perfectly still, her gaze steady, her silence the most cutting rebuttal imaginable. She didn't need to speak every second she refused to respond, only magnified his meltdown, turning his roar into an admission of weakness. The people saw it, they felt it. The camera held on Trump's face as his scream broke into ragged breathing, his chest heaving under the lights. The chamber buzzed with chaos, America with disbelief. And then came the question that ricocheted off every screen, every mind, every trembling heart. Was this the rage of a man still in control or the public unraveling of power itself? The chamber quivered under the weight of Trump's meltdown, but Jasmine never moved. She sat posed, her hands folded neatly on the desk, her eyes fixed on him with the unblinking steadiness of a judge passing sentence. When she finally spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried with a force that cut through the chaos. "History will remember your silence, not your insults." The words landed like a hammer blow, not just on Trump, but on every corner of the nation watching. The gallery gasped, reporters froze mid-scribble, and the feed captured the split screen of calm versus collapse, an image destined to loot for decades. Trump's face twisted in fury, veins straining against his skin. He slammed the desk so hard that papers flew like startled birds, microphones rattled against their stands, and the marble floor echoed the violence of his blow. "I'm done," he roared, his voice breaking into ragged fragments. Then, with a violent scrape of his chair, he shook himself back and lurched to his feet. The cameras locked onto him as he stormed toward the exit, shoulders hunched, fists clenched, his face contorted in a grimace that blurred the line between rage and humiliation. Security scrambled, reporters sprinted after him, cameras bobbing in the chaos of pursuit. The feed caught every second his back retreating down the aisle, his stride jerking faster with every boo that echoed from the gallery. The chamber exploded, half in uproar, half in catharsis. The gavel struck repeatedly, but it could not drown the sound of history unfolding in real time. A former president abandoning the floor under the glare of truth. Outside the chamber, the chase was a frenzy. Cameramen lunged, microphones stretched toward his retreating figure. Security barked orders that only fueled the spectacle. On screens across the nation, hashtags lit up in a wildfire of disbelief, fan vindication. Hashtag Trump walkout. Hashtag Crockett unshaken. Hashtag collapse on camera. Within minutes, the moment fractured into millions of clips shared, retweeted, dissected in the language of a digital age that had just witnessed the unmasking of power. Inside, Jasmine remained seated, the storm raging around her but unable to touch her composure. She adjusted the papers before her, the simple act of order in the middle of chaos. The camera zoomed close, capturing her expression, no gloating, no smugness, only the steel calm of someone who knew the weight of what had just occurred. She leaned once more into the microphone, her voice low, deliberate, almost intimate. The American people have seen enough shouting, they've seen enough rage. Today, they saw the truth walk out of this room. The chamber erupted again, applause, gasps, cheers, the sound of a nation releasing years of pent-up fury. But beneath the catharsis was something sharper, more dangerous, suspense. For as the feed cut between Jasmine's steady face and Trump's retreating shadow, one question burned hotter than the lights above, searing itself into the collective conscience. What happens after the storm out? Does silence end his reign, or does rage return louder than ever? The chamber was still vibrating from the chaos of the walkout when Jasmine leaned forward, voice steady, reclaiming the floor as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. Enough of silence, enough of insults. Today, the voices that matter are the ones who live with the consequences. She gestured toward the screen behind her, and the faces of ordinary Americans filled the broadcast. Not politicians, not pundits, workers, single mothers, veterans, the forgotten, suddenly undeniable. First came a woman in her 30s, her hair tied back, her kitchen bare in the background. She spoke softly but with a weight that pierced the room. They cut my SNAP benefits, why 2 kids 7 and 9 ask. Why dinner is smaller. I tell them mommy's not hungry, but the truth is, I don't have enough. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Reporters lowered their eyes. The pain was so plain it could not be spun. Next, the feed cut to a veteran in uniform, medals pinned neatly to his chest, his voice trembling with controlled rage. I fought for this country, but now I'm fighting to keep a roof over my family's head. Rent's up for $100 in a year. My disability check hasn't budged. I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for dignity. His jaw clenched, his silence afterward louder than any applause. Then a factory worker appeared, grease still on his hands, standing outside a shuttered plant, laid off after 20 years. They told us tariffs would bring jobs back. Instead, they locked the gates. His voice cracked, but he kept speaking. We were loyal, we showed up, and we were discarded like scrap. The chamber was no longer just a room of politics, it was a mirror, forcing the nation to see itself. Jasmine stood, her voice now carrying the weight of every testimony. This is real America, not charts, not spin. These are the lives sacrificed. While power played games, if you're watching at home, you know this pain. You live it, and I want you to tell your story. Share it. How are prices hitting you? How has this crisis entered your home? She let the words hang, her gaze locked with the camera, the plea not rehearsed but raw. And as social media exploded with thousands of stories pouring in, one truth became inescapable. The nation was no longer just watching, it was speaking. The floor was Jasmine's, but the voice was America's. The feed shifted seamlessly from the trembling voices of ordinary Americans into a searing narration, the tone grave, deliberate, cinematic. These struggles are not accidents, they are the direct consequences of policy tariffs that strangled trade and drove costs sky high, Deregulation that handed power to corporations was stripping protections from workers, secrecy, at buried truth and shielded corruption. Each phrase landed like a hammer, pounding home the connection between personal pain and political choices. On the screens, images appear: shuttered factories with weeds crawling up their gates, grocery receipts stretching like prison sentences, eviction notices taped to doors in neighborhoods already bleeding. The narration cut deeper, and while millions suffered, the system bent hardest against those already on the margins. Black farmers, Latino workers, Asian-owned small businesses, communities who carried the nation on their backs, only to be crushed under the weight of decisions made in gilded towers. The montage intensified. A black farmer stood in his field, sole cracked under his boots, his voice heavy with both pride and despair. "My family has worked this land for 3 generations, but tariffs sent my crops to rot. I don't know if there'll be a fourth." His hand dug into the earth, and for a moment the camera lingered on the dirt falling through his fingers, like sand in an hourglass. Next came a Latino construction worker in Texas. His heart had clutched in his hands. "We built the roads, the homes, the offices. But when the costs went up, we were the first cut. I'm not afraid of hard work. I'm afraid of no work." His eyes shimmered with unspoken fury, his children visible behind him in the doorway. Finally, an Asian small business owner in California stood in front of an empty storefront, the glass smeared with tape and closed signs. "We survived the pandemic, we survived recessions. But tariffs and inflation killed us. They told us to be resilient. We were. The resilience doesn't pay rent." His voice cracked, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking with grief. Jasmine rose to her feet, the testimonies framing her like a chorus of truth. "These are not isolated stories. They are the backbone of America. When power turned its back, they stood taller. When policies crushed them, they kept building, growing, fighting, and still, they were punished. But tonight, under these lights, their stories are no longer whispers. They are the heartbeat of this nation." Her hand pressed flat against her chest, and she looked directly into the camera, her eyes burning with both fury and hope. The audience at home felt it, the shift from despair to defiance, from isolation to solidarity. The montage was no longer tragedy, it was a rallying cry. Twitter feeds filled with the same refrain: "We are not alone." Jasmine let the silence swell for just a second before delivering the line that electrified the air: "The pain is real. The people are ready. The only question is, can we turn this pain into power?" The last video testimony. For a heartbeat, the chamber froze, suspended between breath and release. And then it came, the sound of applause rolling through the hall like a wave crashing on stone. First from the gallery, raw and unrestrained, then from members of Congress, who had sat tight-lipped for hours, even moderates nodding, clapping, rising to their feet. The eruption was not partisan, it was human. The cameras swung across faces not often moved, capturing the rare unity that truth could still summon. The control room seized the moment, ticker banners flashing across screens nationwide. Breaking polls shift: Trump rural approval dropped 6%. Another followed, public opinion swinging in real time. The images of farmers, mothers, veterans had punctured something deeper than ideology. They had punctured the armor of denial. Jasmine stood, unmoved in the eye of the storm, but her silence was victory. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she simply absorbed the applause like fuel, her stillness more powerful than 1,000 cheers. Her eyes flicked once toward the camera, locking with the audience at home. It was a look that carried both defiance and promise, the look of someone who knew the tide had begun to turn. Across the country, living rooms erupted in their own applause, people clapping at screens, pounding tables, typing furiously into live-stream chats. The atmosphere had shifted. Hope wasn't theoretical anymore. It was visible, measurable, undeniable. And yet, under the lights, the moment held a fragile edge. For every clap, there was still the looming shadow of retaliation, a fury that had stormed out but was far from defeated. The gallery sensed it, the cameras lingered on it, the audience at home felt it, the tension that victory could be fleeting, momentum fragile, and truth always under siege. Jasmine raised her hand once, quieting the chamber, her final words heavy with both warning and fire. The tide has shifted, the people are awake. But the question remains, will this momentum carry us to the final blow, or will power claw its way back from the edge? The chamber still buzzed from the aftershocks of testimony and collapse when Jasmine turned not to Trump's empty chair, not to the furious allies fidgeting in their seats, but to the camera, to the millions of eyes fixed on her across the country. Her voice softened, but it carried more force than the loudest gavel. "This is bigger than Trump hits about us." The words reverberated, not as attack, but as a call, pulling every viewer from the sidelines into the center of history. The narration slid over the scene like a solemn hymn, each syllable measured and grave. A warrior is not measured by enemies defeated, but by lives defended. As those words landed, the feed cut to a sweeping montage. Faces of the workers, mothers, veterans who had spoken. The gasping gallery rising to its feet, Jasmine's steady eyes locked on truth while chaos tried and failed to break her. The emotional swell rose like a tide, washing over the chamber and beyond, into living rooms and city squares, uniting the fractured audience in a single pulse of recognition. In that moment, the divide between politician and people collapsed. Jasmine wasn't speaking as a lawmaker, but as a vessel for every silenced voice, every weary soul who had been told their pain was invisible. The chamber seemed smaller now, the camera tighter, her face filling the screen like a beacon. She leaned in, her voice rising with conviction, every syllable sharpened by fire. One person can expose corruption. One voice can demand justice. One truth can ignite a nation. The chat feeds lit up like fireworks, comments racing faster than the screen could keep up. "She's speaking for us. This is history." Finally, someone who doesn't flinch. The hashtags ignited. Hashtag one voice. Hashtag lives defended. Hashtag Crockett rising. The sense of unity was palpable. Viewers no longer spectators, participants, their hearts pulled into the rhythm of her words. She let the energy crest, holding the silence just long enough to make the moment burn into memory. Then, with her gaze steady and her voice unwavering, Jasmine delivered the hook that pierced through the nose of a divided nation and into its conscience. "Do you believe one voice can change a nation?" The question didn't fade, it lingered, like a drumbeat in the collective chest of America, daring every viewer to answer with more than words. Jasmine did not let the chamber's silence fade into routine. She leaned forward, her voice rising with the cadence of finality, each word sharpened by the weight of everything that had been revealed. "We've shown the truth in the data, the jobs lost, the prices soaring, the lies buried under silence. We've given justice its voice through the victims who will no longer be erased. And we have fought for the simplest, most sacred promise of all, food on every table in this nation." The words landed like thunder, shaking the room with moral clarity. She paused, her eyes blazing, and the camera tightened its focus, drawing millions into her orbit. "This fight is not new." Dr. King spoke of justice rolling down like water. The civil rights marchers faced fire hoses and jail cells for daring to demand dignity. "My voice is not alone, it carries the weight of every minority, every worker, every forgotten soul who refused to be silenced." The audience erupted, not with applause this time, but with the low hum of reverence, the energy of a nation reminded of its unfinished struggle. The narration swelled, cinematic and unyielding. A movement is not measured by the power it confronts, but by the courage it summons. And courage lives here, in this moment, in the choice of a people who will no longer look away. Jasmine lifted her chin, her final words heavy with both fire and challenge, her gaze locked at the camera one last time, her voice narrowing into a blade. "The truth is here. Justice is waiting. The table can be full again. The only question that remains is this: what will you do with this truth?" The chamber emptied slowly, the echoes of confrontation still clinging to the marble walls. Jasmine stepped down from the dais, not toward the cameras or the press, but toward the people who mattered most. A janitor stood quietly near the exit, mop still in hand, eyes wide from witnessing history. Jasmine reached out, shook his hand firmly, and whispered, "Your work is dignity." He nodded, his grip lingering as though holding on to a lifeline. Next, she crossed to a nurse in scrubs, exhaustion etched into her face from a double shift. Jasmine clasped her hand, looked her in the eye, and said, "Your fight saves lives now, it saves this nation too." The nurse's lips trembled into a smile, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. Finally, a single mother clutching her child stepped forward, her grocery receipt still peeked from her pocket, crumpled but damning. Jasmine bent low, held her hand tight, and promised, "Your story will not be erased." The child's small fingers brushed Jasmine's wrist, and for a heartbeat the chamber felt transformed not into a battlefield, but into a sanctuary. The camera panned wide, capturing Jasmine walking out flanked not by power brokers, but by ordinary people. The narrator's voice carried the weight of a closing hymn. The fight is not over, it begins anew in every home, every kitchen, every weary heart that refuses to surrender. Change does not descend from marble halls, it rises from the hands that will, clean, heal, and endure. The screen darkened, the final text blazing across in stark white. Comment truth if you stand with justice. A beat of silence followed, and then one last line, sharper than any gavel, etched into the nation's conscience. Justice is not a speech, it is a choice. In the end, this story reminds us that justice is not an abstract ideal, it lives in the choices we make every day. When Jasmine stood her ground, she showed that truth gains power only when someone dares to carry it, even against rage, silence, and denial. In our own lives, whether at work, at home, or in our communities, we face moments where speaking up can change the outcome for others. Courage is contagious, and one voice can ignite many. What truth in your life needs your voice today, and will you choose to speak it? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.